So far we are able to create a PDO object, but we haven't been able to do anything apart from that. So this is all we have once we open this. Now I want us to use an autoloader instead so that we can load our classes automatically. So for as long as I'll get this result again, then I'll know that everything is good. So I'll leave this this instantiation of the DB class, but I will remove this like so. So instead what I will do is use SPL autoload. Now instead of SPL autoload, we're going to use SPL autoload register because that's a new thing. So this is the function. So once you run this function, you give it a callback function here. So you tell it what function should be run when a class is not found. Okay, so we can give it a name here, the name of the function, or let's just give it an anonymous function right there so that we don't have to create a separate function. We can just pass in the function itself there. So since we want to add code inside that function, we'll add some space like so. So this function will be called whenever a class name is not found, or a class. For example, here I'm trying to call database and it can't find database anywhere loaded, so it's going to run this function instead, and then it's going to pass in the name of the class that I'm trying to access that it couldn't find. So let's give it a variable to put that class name in there. So we're just going to say class name like so. So here all I want to do is just to echo the class name so that we see how this whole thing works. So what will happen here is it's going to start, load this file, ignore this function, and then when it gets here it'll be like, okay, db new database, and then it won't find this class loaded here, so it'll be like, okay, let me go to the SPL and check what function is registered to handle this event. So here it will find the function, pass in the class name, and then it will echo that name out. So let's see if we get that. Now instead of once we do this, once we register this, we don't get an error anymore about these things. Instead, this is code to handle that situation. So if I now refresh, oh, actually an error is still code because it couldn't find it either way. But at least now it has echoed out the name of the class that it's looking for. So at this point, because it's looking for this very specific class, I can tell it to load just that class instead of loading everything at once. So every time a class is missing, it will be loaded then. So once this happens, we can just tell it, okay, include a file in here. So it's going to include a file. So we say include, or let's use require instead. So let's say require class name like so. Now the issue is the class name that we've been given is just the word database. So the first thing we must do is change it to lowercase because our file is lowercase. So I'm just going to say string to lower like so and put it inside these brackets to make it lowercase. Okay, so once we make it lowercase now, we still have just the word database, but it would be much better if we concatenate a .php at the end, then we have the file name, right? This is why it's important to name the class name and the file name the same to make them easier to find. So now we have the file name, but remember that these files are inside the classes folder. So we have to add it to the beginning here and say classes slash, and then let's close that and do that. So now we're telling it to require a file inside classes, which is named after the same class name with a PHP at the end. So let's see if this works out. So if I now refresh, I get my PDO object okay, right? So now from this moment on, what this means is that any file that I add to classes folder here will be loaded whenever it's required, provided the class name and the file name are the same. The case does not matter. Could be uppercase here, lowercase there, it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, we're going to shift everything to lowercase and find that file. Just make sure that the file itself is lowercase, the whole name is lowercase. Anyway, now that we have access to that, let's go back to the database and finish creating it. So here we are sure that we've created a connection, and that's good. So all we need to do is tell it to return that result. So we'll say return the connection, like so. Now, sometimes the connection may fail, so we must put an error checking system. So we just say if not con, which means things didn't go very well. What we would do is just exit, die, like so. Now, in this case, we might want to do something different. We'll see how we can change these things, because in an API, you just don't want an empty result, right? So for now, we're just going to make it die with an error and say could not connect, but we will change this a bit later. Could not connect, like so. Just so we know for now while we're working on it. So here, since this will return something, if it returns something here, we must capture it. So we'll say con is equal to. So this is how we get this connection from in here to there. Now that we have the connection, we can create a statement right here. Now, in order to run something, we need a query at least. So let's put query there. And then since we're going to be using prepared statements, we're going to need some variables, because the query, since we're using prepared statements, the query will not have any variables in there. The variables will come inside an array like this. But sometimes there is a query that may not have variables or may not need variables. So this array will not be necessary. So this is why we're going to put is equal to array like so. Okay. Now with PHP, you can do type hinting. So here you can specify that this is a string and this is an array that you are expecting. And then you can also give an output. Here, if this function, you want this function to return an array, you can do that as well, like that. But I'm not going to do all that to complicate the lesson. I'm going to leave that all alone. So queries that do not need an array are, for example, where you say select all from users, for example. This one needs no, because there's no where clause, so it needs no variables. These are the cases where this is not required. So once we do this, let's create a statement. We're going to say stmp, something like that, statement. So statement is equal to, you can name that anything you want, doesn't really matter. Con prepare. So because we want it to prepare the query. So let's add the query in there to be prepared. So query. So once the query has been prepared, then the statement will be good to go. If something failed during the preparation, then we must check if the statement is all good. So we'll say if statement, like that. Okay. Quite a number of if statements there. So if statement, then we are good to use the statement. So let's check if running the query will work. So I'm just going to call that check. So I'll say statement execute, like so. Okay. Now, in case of a situation where the array has something in there, we must provide it right here. So let's paste that there. So if it's empty, then that's okay. It's just going to know there's nothing to add and it will forget about it. Now, this is all you need to read from a database or to write to a database. If you're executing a query that does not return a result, let's say, for example, you want to update some data, this is all you need. But if you want to read from the database, then you need to capture the result from this check. So this check itself does not give you the result now. So you'll have to check if the check went well as well. So just say if check there, like so. Then I can now say, okay, let me collect some data. So I'll say data is equal to, and I'll go back to my statement, fetch all, like so. Now, since we are using object-oriented programming anyway, I'll tell it to fetch me some objects instead of arrays. So I'll say fetch underscore obj. Now, this is a constant, just like you see these constants over there. However, this constant is inside the PDO object. That's where it lives. So that's a constant representing the type of data that you want to get. So we'll let PDO access it because it's already added there internally. So we just say PDO double full colon like that, and then fetch object. So this is the constant which will be fetched inside this class that was created by the people that designed this. So then when it sees this, it will know, okay, I should get objects. Great. Now we still need to know if this returns something good, because this has several results. It could return false, or it could return an empty array. Okay, so empty array or false or no sometimes. So I don't know no like this. So we must check to make sure that it's none of these. Okay, so it's not enough to just say if this or if that, because if I put something like if I say if check data like that, this will work as well if it's an array. So instead, I'm just going to be very specific. I'm going to say if is array like that. Oopsie, back like that, just to avoid problems, right? If is array and data, count data is greater than 0. This way I know there's actually items in here. It's not just an empty array. So it should be an array to start with, because if I don't put is array, it could be false, and then I try to count the false, then I'll get an error here. So I must make sure that it's an array, because with and like this, if this becomes false, it doesn't matter what this is. I can have 20 checks this side, it won't go through them, because for as long as one of them is false, then it doesn't matter the other ones, it will not go through this anyway. So it will check this, and if it's not an array, it will just exit, and it will never check that. So this is why I start with this is array, and then just count the items. Are they greater than 0? Then we're good to go. So at this point, I'll tell it to return the data, like so. Okay, then let's remove this line, since that was just for illustration. Now, there's so many if statements, I don't want to add else, else, else there, because that would just become ugly. So instead, what we'll do is, since return will exit the function anyway, it means it will never get to the bottom here if everything is okay. So it means if we put return here, return false, this will only run if any of all these checks fail to get to this point. So whether it fails here or there, doesn't matter, it will get here and return false. So great, otherwise we'll return some data. Nice and easy. Okay, so at this point, let's see if if we can use this. So at this point, I just need to give it a query to read. So all I want is just to return all the results. Yes, it's going to be a bit much, but let's see what we get. So here I want to look for let's look for a table that has very few records. So let's see department employees, we didn't put anything there. Department manager, nothing. Let's see departments. Okay, so departments has something, so let's use that instead. So I'm going to create a query here and say select all from departments, like that. Okay, so I'm not putting the array here because I have no variables in here, so I'll just leave it at that. And then because this will return an array, possibly, we're going to print or send this to a variable called data, and then print the data finally. And I will put my pre-tags as preferred. You don't need to add this every time. It just looks better for the human eye. So I'll put data like so. Okay, so get the results, print them out, and let's see if we did make a good connection. Back here, refresh, and there we go. We have results from our database. So 1 record, 2 record, 3 record, 4, and so on. Okay, so good. We have connected to the database, and it's that easy. So now to send, if we were to send this data to as an output, all we would need to do is just say echo JSON encode. So say JSON underscore encode like that. There's no A here, so be careful with that. It's not JSON. It has to become italic like this to know that it worked. So once we do this, because JSON encode converts this array into a string, and then we can echo it. So let's see that. If I now refresh, this will be the result that we send to whoever is trying to read from this API. I think this will look very familiar to what we were getting from the other APIs. So it's that easy. So anything we're building after this is just to make sure that we return some good results that people are trying to get from our API. All right, so I'll see you in the next video.